Welcome everybody to the fourth and final session of this series on the town's clean water plan. I'm Patrick Cassidy. I'm a consultant who's working with the town to get out information about the plan and about the votes coming up at town meeting and town election. We've had a forum on what the plan is. We've had a forum on how we're going to pay for the plan, and the idea of this forum is to talk about a little bit about why we care and what's at stake in terms of the natural resources involved in protecting the town's water and why clean water matters. With that in mind, we have a esteemed panel here from various perspectives in terms of the importance of clean water in the town. I'm first going to go over just a couple of quick ground rules. We want this to be a little bit more of an informal conversation. So after the panelists have spoken, we're going to certainly hope that you have maybe questions, maybe you have experiences you want to share, and we're open to hearing all that. So when the panel is done speaking, I'll give you the opportunity to kind of raise your hand in various ways. There's a reaction button down at the bottom of your screen in most cases where you can hit that button and raise a virtual hand. You can raise your physical hand, and I'll try and keep an eye on the audience to see who's doing that. There is also the ability to chat to let me know that you have a question, and I'll send a quick hi chat out right now to everybody. So if you have a question and you're not getting my attention some other way, you can chat and say, I have a question. If you want, you can actually send the question in the chat itself. If you're unable because of technology or some other reason to ask the question yourself, I can ask it for you. And I may have a few questions towards the end of this as well. And so those are the various ways that you could get my attention to ask a question after the panel is done speaking. We're going to keep everybody else on mute while they're speaking. So just be aware of that. If you go to speak at one point, you may be on mute and have to unmute yourself. And I'll basically try and call on some people at the end to ask their questions and talk. And we'll do it that way. Again, more informal, more of a conversation than anything else here. So I'd like to just introduce the panel at once, and then I'll ask each of them to kind of speak in turn here. We have Richard Cook, a shell fisherman extraordinaire, somebody who's been doing this for quite a while, I think, and I certainly followed his travails in getting one particular grant secured over the years, and he worked hard to do that, and is now working that grant as far as I know, and will tell us about why clean water is important to the work he does and his life on the water. Plenty of time on the water, I'm sure. We also have Tom O'Neill, a realtor in town who many of you may know. Certainly, like all these guys, is probably pretty busy. I imagine even more so with the market like it is right now. But Tom has a number of accolades, including Mashpee Citizen of the Year in 2014, has been involved in a lot of activities in town. Most impressive to me, I was reading though, Tom, you have a degrees in French and biology and speak Spanish fluently. So that was something that really did impress me about your background. So Tom will be talking to us about, again, the importance of clean water as it relates to real estate values and things of that nature. And then Bill McKay, who is a resident who lives on the Mashpee River and certainly has spent many years out there. From our couple of conversations, he's been out there sailing, he's been out there fishing, he's been counting herring, and again, the fishing for striped bass near and dear to my heart. So we'll hear about Bill's experience on the water and what he's seen going on out there. And then finally, Selectman Andrew Gottlieb, who will be talking about his feelings about the water quality in town, and is here to answer any other questions you may have. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dick Cook to start with, and I'm going to put up some slides for a couple of these guys just with some images as they're talking, but it's not necessarily in line with what they're talking. It's some images for you to see the types of things that they're talking about. And ask everybody just to remember to mute themselves if they're unmuted. just because the feedback sometimes, and I'll go through and mute people when I see that they're unmuted so that everybody else can hear. We'll have you unmute when we're at the question and answer phase as well. So without further ado, Dick, if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, and I'll start sharing some pictures that you had sent me.
First of all, thank you very much for having me speak here with your group. My name's Richard Cook, Dick Cook, everybody calls me, and I was born in Worcester, Mass. Moved to Cape Cod in 1967 when I was 11 years old. My dad got a job at the power plant in Sandwich, and we were all pretty much avid fishermen, so he thought it was a good fit to just come on down here where we like to vacation. So we moved down. Upon graduating from vocational high school in 1974, there were no jobs really here. So I did a stint in the Navy for several years, and when I got out, when I was discharged, returned to the Cape and rented a small house in Mashpee, and obviously fell in love with the natural resources here. In 1983, after gaining, well, I got my electrician's license in 1980 actually, and of all things, I started commercial shell fishing after getting my electrician's license. I was talking to somebody, and they said, "Hey, you can make a good day's pay." So I started doing that and doing some electrical stuff myself. And during that time, I applied for and received an aquaculture farm license in Aquay Bay, 1983. You know, it was a commercial venture, and I had no idea how good it was for the environment. I just thought about it as being a way to grow my own shellfish. So growing up with my two brothers and myself and my parents, we did a lot of fishing and shellfishing and foraging for mushrooms. So the shellfish thing fed my passion and paid the bills at the same time. And eventually I did both electrical and shellfishing. I built a house in Mashpee and fell in love with and married my soulmate, Diane, and raised identical twin boys who are now Navy pilots. So, you know, until the year really 1986, I took the clarity of water in Mashpee and elsewhere for granted. I just, you know, this was the way it was. It was the clarity of the water, and the bounty was accepted as being normal, which it was for back then. I had no thoughts that it would be impacted in the way it has. I mean, an example is when we ice fished, we'd drink the water in any pond we were fishing at. It didn't even we didn't even think about it twice. So, and while shellfishing in 10 feet of water in the middle of the summer, I could see the quahogs rolling into my rake, literally see them rolling into the rake 10 feet down in the middle of summer. So you can't do it in 3 feet of water now. So at that time, the mid 80s, there was a steady decline in eelgrass, and within a few years, the eelgrass was totally gone, as well as the scallop crop was totally gone. The water was cloudy, algae mats were forming, and portions of the bay were closed to the taking of shellfish, which had never happened before. And to this day, that's still the case. And I mean, the rest is well documented. We know that the main culprit is septic systems. all I can say is those who have never seen the bay looking like a huge aquarium full of eelgrass, scallops, grass shrimp, eels, and millions of tiny immature fish really don't know what they're missing. But I'm very hopeful because I know this can be turned around with some hard work and some action. I think we need to act now and stop the degradation, because the town of Mashpee and living things are counting on us. That's what I have.
That's great, Dick. Thank you very much. And interesting, and maybe we'll get back to it in the question and answer. You know, speaking to the water quality being an economic driver, and literally what you do for a living is based on that, and that's something that's important. And I also found it interesting how you described kind of that stark change that occurred at one point. And again, maybe we can come back to that and discuss it more later on. Thank you for your comments. Tom, can you, I guess, explain what water quality means to what you do for a living and to residents as well and their homes?
Patrick, were you addressing me? I couldn't hear you.
Yes, Tom.
Okay.
No, you're up.
Thank you.
Yep, sorry.
Well, I just briefly, I started my business here 28 years ago. I was fortunate to end up on the Cape after I had been schooled in New York City. I kind of ended up here by accident and was given an opportunity. And but my background actually in New York City, in part of my degree, I took environmental biology and marine biology. I spent 6 years on and off in South America with entomologists who were studying alternative biocontrol instead of using insecticides. So in some ways they were looking for a way to do better by the environment in their sphere of study. And so then when I ended up here, we started to do waterfront building and designing, and as part of it, the D-Night systems came into play that were available, that we began installing, that were a better alternative than conventional systems, that we knew that they removed a higher percentage of nitrogen than conventional systems. And we would encourage our clients, regardless of whether they were required or not, if we would educate them and say this is the right thing to do, and it will be well received if you do that. So we did encourage, and we still do encourage as our customers to install these systems, and we make sure that we're working with companies that will be there to service the systems over time. These systems allow more air and light in to make sure that the solid waste is surrounded by a flora that inside the tanks that break down solid waste, and essentially in a small way, the same way that conventional waste treatment plants are done. So we've tried to be conscious from the very beginning of our impact. We also were conscious of the environment and how we did landscaping and all of these other things that were associated. And we know that now our town has so many of these waste treatment plants distributed around that are effective and working uh, to remove nitrogen. And when I was president of the Chamber of Commerce, I got involved in going and attending the sewer commission meetings. And I did that over about a 5-year period because I felt the business community should be involved and understand and create a liaison style position with the sewer commission. And of course, I went to these meetings where engineers would come, they would discuss engineering, and every meeting would be very similar, where what could be, it's going to cost billions, hypothetical, there's no money, these kinds of things. And of course, you know, you're thinking all along that at some point, we need to get there. We need to come into the modern age. This is a very progressive community. We've done a lot together that is been exciting, and we should be a model for the rest of Cape Cod, because I think we've done a lot of very interesting things together in all areas. So I think that sort of this, it's very important for businesses to be involved and to encourage us to come into the modern age. Even these D-Night systems, even though they're so effective and they, in comparison to a conventional system, their numbers of their parts of nitrogen level that they remove are very effective. The waste treatment plants are able to do a much better job, even about, probably 75% more effective. And we already have these small systems available. I'm looking forward to seeing this town actually move forward and install these systems and get a handle on nitrogen, because I said in a recent meeting, and essentially nitrogen is really the virus, our environmental virus here on the Cape, and for drinking water, our bays, everything. And we need to get a handle on it. And we need to come into the modern age and have sewering.
Great, thank you, Tom. And obviously it's, again, important for people as they're looking at their properties. The environment around them is important. And certainly it sounds like your biology degree has come in handy in terms of understanding some of these issues in all likelihood. I don't know about the French degree, that may or may not be. Thank you for the comments. And now, Bill McKay, I'm gonna, I did mute you at one point. I was just muting everybody, so you may have to unmute yourself in order to speak again. That's the button there. And if ask to unmute to get you unmuted in a second. Sorry, Bill, do you see the unmute button? Down in the
unmute.
There you go. You got it. Sorry.
All right.
I had to do it. You're up, Bill.
All right. It's an honor to follow all these young people that know what buttons to push and everything else on these little flat things. So in my 5 minutes here, I'm going to just survey the last 50 years, a couple of comments about each decade. We have been here that long. We've been here over 50 years, and we certainly came in here in the early 70s, buying a lot from a friend's father and knowing nothing about, all we knew was Mashpee was half price of Falmouth and Barnstable. And so let's go where we can afford to live, raise some kids. But so we built a spec house, didn't work out real well. In the middle of the 70s, the Wampanoag tribe filed suit, and like many Wampanoag businesses and every other business in town, and anybody that had a title on their land that was gone for 4 or 5 years. And and that was a lucky thing in a way, because up to that point, no one had ever thought about, uh, you know, wastewater treatment plants. What do we know? We were all out of school and we figured we could take a book and figure out how to build a house. I don't know. But bottom line was, the land suit, there was a lot of education went on. There was a lot of thinking about Mashpee, and it kind of set up things for the 80s for an environmental time. Now we had to move out a few times, and so as far as the Mashpee, that area, we lived up on Camp Farley for 2 years off and on, just because we couldn't afford to live in the spec house we had built, and so we got to see that part of the watershed. Not an overly developed pond, a deep pond, incredible wildlife in it. We really started to learn, and I worked with the Conservation Corps a little bit, kids doing projects around the area, and I learned to care about streams and the wildlife in them, and what it meant to just sit at the side of some of these places with a few people and daydream. I mean, there's got to be some value in that. It's hard to put a value on it, but so anyway, the 70s kind of finished up, and then when the 80s started, now the town had turned. The town fathers were starting to hire experts in. They brought Tom Fadala in the early 80s, and and he's, they started writing cluster development things, and in certain parts of the town would be, left alone, and other was dense, and part of the thing then is, and now is, some of those dense developments need some help because they're putting a lot of nitrogen into the ground, and so that was a pretty exciting time. And the town fathers were really, they were really studying and bringing Mashpee along, maybe 10 years behind the other towns. So they had a chance to really study what they were doing. In the middle of that, I was fortunate to tack on with 4 or 5 other citizens, and get involved in the Mashpee River woodlands purchases on both sides of the river. And I see some pretty nice photos here. But anyways, that was about a 1.5-year project. Tom Fadala wrote a great management plan. A lot of us decided, but 2 or 3 of us that went to promote the vote, and also, what the river really meant to people, decided that, we did a slideshow and some of the normal things, but the really important thing was just take people out there. So we loaded up 10 canoes at a time for a 1.5 years, even in the winter, and took people out on the river and let the river talk to them. And we'd take officials from Boston. Joel Lerner was the head of the state self-help funds. And, if you just shut your mouth and gave them some, some food, they understood what it was all about, and here's a contiguous river for like 6 miles, really, because north of 28, trustees of reservations had tied up a lot of that land all the way up to the herring run and into the pond. So there was really a unique environment, and considering it's so close to something like Mashpee Commons, which is, a well put together center, it's just amazing. You go up there now, you feel like you're back 100 years or 1,000 years, maybe. So that was very successful. We raised, I think 4.5 million, 5 million. The owner, Earl Marcis, took back 500,000, and it was the biggest self-help grant from the state self-help monies at that point in history. So little Mashpee just, pulled off a coup, but it wasn't us. It was because people were out there on the river using it, So then we move up to the 90s, where there was a lot of education about Otis and the water district, and there was a lot of worry about what was going on under the earth up near the base. So people in town really started to get educated in the votes. I mean, that's what this is about, votes. The votes in the next month, 3 votes, and luckily now there's there's better technology, and there's a lot more people and properties to pay for it. So it's my point of view on voting, and I promise not to talk about numbers, but if it costs me, we used to say cup of coffee and a donut every day will buy you the Mashpee River. Well, it's probably 2 donuts and more than that now, but not much for the average homeowner. I'm happy to pay. I'll vote yes for every single vote now for the rest of my life, because the selectmen, all the people they've hired up there to do the real science, they know what they're talking about. So the average person like me that just goes out there and enjoys it and works. I do some volunteer stuff, but we're happy to vote yes and give our tax money for certain things like this. So anyway, you get to the 2000s. I have to say, and I'm not bragging, but I sailed 100 times a year for 25 years on the river, canoeing, motorboating, walking the trails. Oh yeah, I did cut about 9 miles of those trails with a Gravely back in the late 80s, and I did put in most of those benches, a lot of the signs, and we had a jolly time. Ferragamos and Dick Terry and Tom Fadala. We'd show up with implements of destruction and build those small trails and help the public use what they bought basically and gave to the Conservation Commission. I'm just so proud that we haven't had to do much less since then, because people take care of it. You never go out and see people leaving things. I think tons of people, there's an incredible amount of use, and and there's in Tom's plan, there's still plenty more things to do. So at any rate, I've had the opportunity to count herring for a number of years. At one point, I remember counting 1,000 herring in 10 minutes. So it's really the heaviest, if not the second heaviest, herring run on the Cape. It's fabulous up there at Mashpee Pond. You can, any taxpayer that wants to, get a little more involved, you can go and you can adopt a trail or 2 and go out and, when something goes wrong there, you can help fix it or report it or whatever. There's a lot of little advantages like that. The last thing I say though is it is a little to do with numbers. I mean, and it, you gotta honor what's out in our future. I mean, we came here, my wife and I, before you know it, my kids, are married. There's 10 people. Before you know it, they get kids. Now there's 11. So there's 25 people or so, just in one little family. And all my kids are involved in some way. Some of them are teachers and bring their classes over here. And kids learn what we never learned when we were in school, environmental things. And then, and one of them's a marine biologist and is a researcher with a lab out in California. She did water studies when she was a kid. That's what all the kids do. They go out the river and do, so basically, 50 years down the road, who knows how the other type of things that can happen in this watershed, it excites me, and we owe it to those future generations to spend a little bit of money right now to vote yes on these objects, these votes coming up this month. We owe it to the tribe who taught us a lot right at the beginning, and then all the people that have been hired by the town fathers. I trust them, and I'm happy to to, send my check off to Mashpee. So that's it for me. I hope you have some questions. And if you ever bump into me, I'm very happy to talk to you here and there. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I don't doubt it. And again, I'm hoping to bump into you and have a longer conversation myself. So thanks for your comments.
You're welcome.
Andy, would you like to follow up here and let us know about your feelings on the
Sure.
resources out there?
Sure. So I just have to, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to follow Bill. Bill's one of my heroes. He and a group of other people had a vision back in the 70s and 80s that has resulted in, at least from the outside and the land side, the river looking as it has for generations. And sort of as an early, a little younger than Bill, it's a early life lesson that, the actions of a few small dedicated individuals can make a lasting impact on the world in which we live, and provided, the basis for us to even have this conversation about restoring the water part of the river, the essential part of the river. If we didn't have that land protected, this would be a different conversation. I think that the only thing we didn't see back in the 70s was, that what else was happening on the land was going to have such a dire impact on water quality. I think there was a well-felt feeling of relief when the land was protected. You thought, well, this river ought to be okay now. And what we've learned in the decades since is that what we're doing on the land, primarily with our antiquated and inadequate means of treating wastewater, has really had negative impacts on water quality. And part of me feels badly that much of my adult life, I became aware of the resources at a time that were similar to what Dick described, that you could see the bottom, you could see the aquatic life, you had a really vibrant resource. And that, one of the great sadnesses of my life is to have been in town over a period of time and watched that come to an end. And that once was really no longer exists in any meaningful form. But I also am heartened by the fact that, we have an opportunity to reverse that in the remainder of our lifetimes and leave for my kids, I'm hoping, 2 young adults who, are at the stage I was when I became somewhat aware of my surrounding environment, that they will then look back at their 30s, 40s, and 50s as a period of time when water quality improved in Mashpee, and that what they will leave behind is a set of resources that are more like what we inherited when we came to Mashpee in the 60s and 70s for most of us. And the means to do that, frankly, is shockingly simple. You have before you at town meeting a series of questions that would authorize the construction of our initial wastewater treatment plant and our first round of sewers to collect wastewater from the upper reaches of the Mashpee River watershed that the science has demonstrated is what is necessary to stop and then reverse the degradation of our resources. And what we've seen in other places is that when you stop the harm, when you stop the insult, these systems have incredible ability to heal themselves. And we've seen it in other places. We've seen it in Boston Harbor, which went from the dirtiest urban harbor to the cleanest urban harbor in a much shorter period of time than our plan even anticipates happening. So we have the opportunity to make that reversal. There is no other plan. There is no other practical alternative. The wastewater program that the town has put before you has been 30-something years in the making. It's been devised over time when we've seen the predictions of the early people who were aware of what was going on, who were more in touch with the resource, told us was going to happen. It has happened. We've lost the eelgrass. We've lost the native populations of reproducing shellfish. We've lost the finfish habitat. We've lost the aesthetic beauty of the river. We've seen the resources degrade to the point where we cannot, in good conscience, allow that to continue. The program that's in front of you, Pat, I don't know if you have that slide or not, is comprised of a handful of things you're going to be asked to do. You're going to be asked at town meeting to vote on Article 6, which is the debt authorization to allow the treatment plant to be constructed, as well as the initial round of sewering. You're going to be asked to vote, and without a yes, a 2/3 yes on Article 6, none of the rest of this matters. Nothing. Without a treatment facility, there is no means to restore our waters. So Article 6 is the key. It requires a 2/3 because it's debt authorization. If you think what you've heard all makes good sense, and how, of course, could this not pass? The way it could not pass is if you think it's a good idea and you don't show up. Because for every no vote, you need 2 yes votes for this to pass. So just think of the math. We need bodies. We need people who care about the environment, care about the long-term economic and environmental future of this community to come to town meeting and do the right thing. Article 7 allows the transfer of a piece of property for the construction of a pump station on Mashpee Neck Road. Article 8 establishes what's known as a flow neutral bylaw, which places some reasonable limits on the future growth and connections for new development into the sewer system. It is the key to the town obtaining a 0% loan from the state for this project versus a 2% loan. In very stark terms, what that means is the difference between a loan at 2% and a loan at 0% is $17 million in interest costs that will not be borne by the taxpayers of the town of Mashpee. And then the whole thing is contingent, if Article 6 passes, on the passage of question 1 at the annual town election. May 8th is the election, 7 to 8 in the morning till 8 at night. You can get an early voting form from the town website or from the town clerk's office and vote by mail, should you so choose to do that. Question 1 simply moves the debt from our inside Proposition 2.5 to outside Proposition 2.5. What does that mean? It basically means that the town will be able to undertake this debt obligation and still have room to incur future debt for other projects. Simply takes the debt outside of our state cap and therefore leaves room and therefore preserves our AAA bond rating. Unlike previous debt authors or debt exclusions that you may have been asked to vote on for school construction, road bonds, town hall improvements, fire station improvements, and the like, this one will not raise your taxes. Those did because the town relied on property tax assessments to pay the bill. In this instance, the town has developed a financing plan that relies on a combination of state and county-based grants and utilization of existing revenues, either from hotel, motel, short-term rental tax revenue, which is non-taxpayer based money, or the recently approved water infrastructure fund, which is already authorized and provides a surcharge on your property taxes that you'll be paying regardless of whether this project moves forward or not. It utilizes those 4 funding sources to finance this project in its entirety. So there is no increase in your taxes other than what is already programmed to take place. So as much as possible, this is a prepaid project that provides long-term return on that investment in the form of improved water quality for the community and preserving property values. And Mashpee is a great place to live. So I'll close with just hammering away on the notion that this is our chance. This is our chance to right some wrongs, some environmental wrongs that have been done over the years, some knowingly, some unknowingly. Doesn't really matter. We have the water quality we have. We know what the cause is. We have a practical, reasonable, affordable solution before town meeting, and we need 2/3 of town meeting voters to approve it in Article 6 in order to move forward with this. Thanks.
Thank you, Andy. So anybody who is interested in asking a question or saying something, you can, again, hit the reaction button down below or chat me that you're interested in asking a question. Or if you need to, you can unmute and say, I have a question. I just don't want people to step on each other necessarily if everybody's talking at once. But are there any questions out there? And again, if not, I'll be happy to ask some questions. I'll give it a couple seconds here. All right, well, then I'll jump in, and again, feel free to, Dick, had you raised your hand there? And the panelists are welcome to ask questions of each other if you like. Dick, you're on mute, so if you wanted to say something, you'd unmute yourself. And feel free to unmute. It may have to happen on your phone.
Unmute.
There you go.
No, there we go.
Yep.
Andrew, I had a question, and I have a question, and that is, from your feeling, your feedback you're getting from whatever sources, do you feel like this is potentially a contentious vote? Or, I mean, to me, it seems like if you're confident that, I'm just speaking from a typical voter's perspective, if a typical voter's perspective is that this is going to work over time, then it's a yes wholeheartedly. To me, there's no reason why it would be a no.
I guess what I'll tell you, Dick, is, I'm not aware of any, organized opposing view out there. What I'm worried about is a couple of things. One is that we live in a time when, as an elected public official, small scale stuff, but the same dynamics apply. There's a segment of the population that just doesn't believe you. There's a cynicism out there that if it comes from somebody who's elected's mouth, it's not true. It's part of some broader conspiracy. Who the hell knows? And so I worry about that. So there's a certain segment of the population that just is programmed to not believe me. And so that worries me a little bit. There's a certain segment of the population that thinks that, government spending is wasteful and that this is therefore an inherently wasteful idea. And then more than anything else, I worry about just a sense of complacency that, well, of course this makes sense. And, why wouldn't people vote for it? Because, the technology makes sense. The finance plan is solid. It's not going to cost me any more additional money on my tax rate. It's a proven technological approach to it. It's been well thought out. It's been well vetted. The finance committee is unanimously in support. The board of selectmen is unanimously in support. I got homework from late from work today. I don't really feel like going to town meeting and listening to all that yammering about stuff that doesn't interest me. It'll pass. And if enough people think that, it may not. So, I might be paranoid about this, but, every public policy initiative and every public policy campaign that I've ever been in, the ones where you get surprised is the one you think you know what the outcome is going to be. And if you don't run scared and don't, push for every person who can potentially vote to support your issue, you're asking to lose. And we've been pushing this rock up the hill for 30 something years. And we've gotten to a point where it's not that contentious. And it's not that controversial. And it makes rational sense for the community. And I just, it would kill me to get that close and lose by 2 votes because we just didn't push it hard enough. So if you think it's a good idea, you got to show up. And if you think it's a good idea, you got to bring 3 or 4 people who think that with you, because that's how it works.
Thanks. And thanks, Dick. I'm going to take a question that I got through the chat. And I'm not sure if there's a precise answer to this, but somebody was asking about the difference in cost between a conventional traditional sewer system and the D-Night systems that Tom was referring to. Now, again, presumably these D-Night systems are on an individual property basis, if I'm not mistaken, and kind of making that analysis is difficult. But
you know, the issue about, you know, the cost of D-Night systems highly variable by site. You know, there's the cost of the technology, then there's the cost of the installation, and each property is different. You know, so D-Nights can run from low end 15 grand to 25 or 30. Tom, is that, you know, kind of in your ballpark range?
I would say that on average, they're between 18,000 and 22,000, whereas a conventional system might be 8,500 to 13,000.
Right.
So I always told my customers the differential is about $10,000 on average.
Right. And if you look at the cost, you know, compared to what we're doing with the conventional, you know, with this wastewater treatment facility, you know, the incremental cost, even though it's covered by other revenue streams, for an average property, average value property in Mashpee is, you know, in the upper $150 per year. So, you know, if you look at this from the perspective of you own your home, as I do, I have a septic system. My septic system needs replacement. I'm 100% on the hook to pay that bill tomorrow. And I don't have 15 grand sitting around to write a check for a conventional system right now. So, you know, the value of the public collection system is it spreads the cost out among a larger property, a larger base. And it also provides the ability to spread the cost out over time because the town is borrowing and paying it back over a 30-year cycle. So it lowers the individual homeowner exposure. And the other piece of this equation is whether you're buying a conventional system or a IA system, you're spending all that money and you're getting lousy water quality for your investment, because we know that by themselves, IAs and conventional septic systems don't meet the standards we need for nutrient reduction. So you're spending a lot of money to degrade your waters. Whereas with the wastewater program the town's putting forward, you're spending your money and you're getting good water quality back in return, which you're going to see back in quality of life and higher resale values when it's time to move your property forward.
Thank you. And I know Bill's on the move, so I think he's staying on the phone with us if anybody's got questions for him. I'm going to segue into somebody else who has a question. Mary, I believe you have some questions for the panel.
Yeah, I'd like to ask, excuse me, if I may, a two-part question. One's about the downside, the other's about the upside. On the downside, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about the cost of not doing this, because you know, I personally think we have no choice, but I think that it's much easier for people to think that they're, you know, you just let it slide and it'll go away. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And then the upside is, you know, and this has been wonderful hearing all the history, and, you know, I already knew this, but when you hear the stories firsthand of all the work that citizens and the town have done over the years to make Mashpee what it is, and our incredible natural resources, we've done so much right. And, you know, if we can get on top of this problem, then is there an opportunity for Mashpee to really lean into that and emphasize how wonderful and environmentally conscious the town has been? You know, we have to solve this problem, but you know, what's the upside? So those are the two questions. What's the upside and what's the downside?
I mean, I'll defer to Tom and Dick on the upside piece, and I'll, as I am known to do, happy to talk about the downside. But
Well, if I may speak, I think it's, I go back to the Chamber of Commerce, looking at all of the wonderful things that we say. There was a time when things were really bad here for business. And there was a time when around the table, there was an idea of closing the Chamber of Commerce. That's how bad things got economically at one point in this town. And a few of us said, hey, it may be bad, but we can reverse our course and we can all work together. We can find a solution. This is a smart bunch, but we need everyone's participation. Let's be a model. Let's be an example. Let us work together. And so that was our mantra. And we had a couple events. We turned it around. All of a sudden, we had cash in our accounts, and we were being positive that we can find a solution. And we know there's a solution. We already know what it is. The engineers have done that for us. We need to be a model, as you just said, and work together. Show Cape Cod that we know how to do things here, and go forward with as soon as we can. It was so frustrating for so many years where you go to meetings for years and nothing happens. That's the worst thing. We need things to happen. We need this to come. I have customers who ask me, when are the sewers coming? When are they coming? And I asked, for example, this morning, a few people in the know. I said, if we go forward with this, how long does it take till we actually see pipes in the ground? It's going to be years from now. That's why it's important that we keep moving forward, because it takes a long time to get this to be a reality. Now we have an environment of people, a consensus that this is important to us, because we don't want to reach a crisis level. And we have options now, and we have an ability to have financing and some of these other things. And the engineering is in place in large part. So we need to all work together and be positive. We can get through this and make our water clean again.
Thanks, Tom. Dick, I saw you shaking your head up and down in terms of the time that it takes. And in terms of the water quality, I think you spoke earlier to the idea of this change that occurred. I guess how often, do you have any sense of, how the water quality is affected over time, and how long it takes to change water quality from your time on the water?
It doesn't take any time for bad input to change good water quality into bad water quality. But I think it takes, that did happen gradually over time. But if we take a big input of bad water and put it in the bay right now, it's going to affect the bay right now. But people need to understand that it's going to take a while to get this system in place. And from that point, it's going to take time before the contaminated water, if you will, that's in the ground now, is flushed all the way through and down through the bay and out, which is where the groundwater goes, basically, in the direction of Nantucket Sound. So I'm not an engineer or a scientist, but I do know enough about it to know that. I don't know how much time is involved, but I'm sure it's a minimum of, a couple of years or maybe a year to see some results, but the full results will take longer. But the bottom line is we need to get started, so that in the short future we're talking about, okay, well, we're starting to see some results, but I think people need to understand that it's going to take time. It's not going to be overnight.
So the upside is that we're starting if we do this. Andrew, you were going to address the downside.
Yeah, just to speak to the downside, I think that, you know, in answer to Mary's question, it's a little speculative. I will say I feel quite confident in saying that the days of Mashpee treating this as an issue that is a discretionary choice and we'll do it when and if we feel like it are over. And the reason I say that is there are legal proceedings out there. The law requires us to do something, bottom line. You know, we've been out of compliance with state and federal law for a number of years. And there are environmental organizations. The town has been served with a notice of intent to sue under the state natural resource damages law from a third-party environmental organization, not mine, that you know, is watching very closely what we're doing. As a potential defendant in that litigation, I am limited in what I can say about it, other than the fact that you know, I think that we are going to be doing a wastewater control program one way or the other. We can do it the way we propose to do it, in a stepwise manner where we have the ability to do it in phases that balance the environmental need and the ability of the community to absorb the impact of the construction project and to finance it in a way that's good for our community, or we'll do it on the back end of a judicial decree. And the history of Clean Water Act litigation in the United States since 1972 is that once you're under a court order, you go for the biggest, most technologically complex and expensive solution because the judge cares about one thing. Are you or are you not in compliance? Judge doesn't want to hear about how many pounds of nitrogen Dick's shellfish grant is taken out and do the math on how many, you know, how many oysters and clams he's raised and figure out how many septic systems. He wants to know, he or she wants to know, are they meeting the discharge limits at the end of the pipe? I don't want to hear about any of the rest of this nonsense. And that ends up being the most expensive, most disruptive, least manageable outcome for your community. So it's going to be one or the other. We can do it of our own, or we can be forced to do it. But the days of thinking and pretending like this is a choice are over. The other thing people need to be aware of on the downside, and this is a really big downside, is all of the state programs that are helping us finance this and take it off the tax rate, the zero interest loan program, the Water Protection Trust Fund, which, you know, the zero interest loan programs avoiding $17 million in interest payments. The principal forgiveness from the state is saving us about $1.2 million on repayments. The Cape and Islands Trust Fund has given us about $13 million. If you're implementing your project or as a result of a judicial order to do so, you don't qualify for any of that. So all that money goes away. And where does it land? It lands in our checkbook. So we have the choice of doing this, an expensive project, in phases with substantial state and county assistance, or we can do it on somebody else's time frame without any of that extra money. Seems like a pretty obvious choice to me.
Great. And I just want to note the time. It's 11 o'clock and this was going to be an hour. For anybody who has to jump off, thank you for joining us. And I may just keep everybody on the panel on for just a few more minutes here, but appreciate it. And just wanted to let everybody know that this, along with the other forums that we've done, are all being put up on Mashpee TV's YouTube page, and also being put up on Mashpee TV as well. And these were the previous forums. Anybody can reach me at mashpeewaters@gmail.com with any additional questions. And just one additional question that came through in the chat that we could address, Andy or anybody else, was the neighborhood around the transfer station. And that was something that we did have a one-page sheet out about the impacts of the facility itself, and how those are being mitigated. And I guess if you want to address that.
Sure, I'll run through that real quick. And you know, we put together a good piece on that, but the design and location of the treatment plant has been done in order to minimize the impact on the surrounding neighborhood to the greatest extent possible. The state requires a 50-foot minimum buffer between the facility and a residence. In no place is it less than 3 times that. So we are at a minimum 150 feet away from any other property. In many instances, more than 200 feet away. We're leaving as much natural tree cover as possible. The facility will be surrounded by fencing, and the area will be planted with native vegetation to allow greater buffering from the public streets. The facility itself, the treatment works are done underground, and they are subject to negative pressure to prevent any odors from escaping the treatment facility into the surrounding neighborhood. What is air is emitted from the facility goes through 2 mechanical or physical odor reduction technologies. There is no treatment plant on the Cape that public treatment plant on the Cape that utilizes more than 1 technology, and we're doing both. So we've done it in a way that is intended to both minimize the visual impacts as well as eliminate the potential for odors and disruption. It will be once constructed, we feel a pretty inobtrusive addition to that particular area, and one that has been designed intentionally to both provide high levels of treatment and do so in a way that makes it as unnoticeable as possible to the surrounding neighborhood. But there's more detail on the sites that you mentioned, Patrick.
And there's my dogs calling it a day for us. I appreciate the panel's time. I appreciate everybody who's attended here. And again, anybody can follow up with more questions as needed at Mashpee by emailing mashpeewaters@gmail.com. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Dick. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Bill, who's on the road listening to us, I think still right now. Appreciate everybody's time, and feel free to reach out with any questions or anything else that you have to say about this. And
Patrick, one last quick thing on the get out to vote idea, just so people know, we've moved town meeting to an outdoor venue. We're going to have a large tent. We've done this to encourage as many people to feel comfortable coming to participate in town governance as possible, as a way of minimizing potential COVID exposures. I know that last year there were some people that, even though we did a lot to try and manage it, were uncomfortable with the indoor venue. We will be outside. Hopefully people will be comfortable with that setting. And again, really encourage you, if you like this program, you think it's necessary, come and bring your friends.